to order. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, public comment. Nobody has approached me or the clerk relative to public comment. We will move on to approve the minutes of the December 13th meeting, which are in the packet. What are your wishes? Are there any questions, comments, or motions?
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Chair Gibbs. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. And we have Supervisor Leahy on WebEx. We will move on to item 6A1, approval of December claims and question costs that was sent to you in both regular format and an Excel spreadsheet format last week. What are your wishes? Any questions? Supervisor Hart. Moved by Supervisor Hart to move to approve. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approving the December claims and question costs will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We will now move on to acceptance of the Women United Impact Grant. Lance, am I turning it over to you or to Krista?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Krista Jensen. I'm the director with Marathon County Social Services. Our department was chosen as the proud recipient of the United Way Women United Impact Grant, which is a grant that carries the power to really make a very positive impact on the lives of families, specifically non-custodial mothers here in our community. So this grant totaled $7,000, was earmarked for a cause close to our hearts to establish a facilitation of a non-custodial mother support group. In our ongoing efforts to provide comprehensive support to families, we've recognized that this is a unique challenge that is often faced by non-custodial mothers within our Elevate and our Child First programs in our child support unit. So 30 to 40% of our program participants fall into this category of non-custodial mothers, which is about 112 women. There's a lot of societal pressures associated with this role, coupled with the challenges of understanding their role in their children's life when they are the non-custodial parent, often leaving these mothers feeling isolated and uncertain about what that role looks like. So to address this, we have conducted a survey among our non-custodial mothers involved in our two programs, Elevate and the Children's First program, and the response was really very overwhelming with enthusiasm and a wealth of ideas pouring in, demonstrating a genuine need for this structured support group. So we're building off of the success of our existing non-custodial fathers support group, and building on that, we're really confident that this initiative is going to yield very positive outcomes for our community. The grant funds are going to be allocated to conduct biweekly support group sessions throughout the year, and the funds will cover the cost of a dedicated facilitator, as well as some providing nourishing meals during the sessions and to offer incentives for participants' participation, as well as maybe some minor transportation costs to allow non-custodial mothers to attend. We did have a social services board meeting held on January 5th, and they did unanimously vote to accept this grant. And we're aware that this is not a grant that was previously in our budget because it became aware after the budget timeline was available. There are no additional county match required. There is no additional tax levy to be imposed to facilitate this support group. And I think it's really a testament to our community's commitment to the well-being of our members that we were able to receive this grant and hopefully able to provide this level of service to our non-custodial mothers. So we're seeking the support today of this committee to be able to accept the $7,000 grant from the United Way.
All right. Are there any questions for Krista? Chair Gibbs.
I guess, Krista, I think it's a great opportunity. The question then becomes, so the grant is for this year. Obviously, we're going to apply to potentially receive the grant for future years. What's the alternative if grant funding is not available in 2025, for example?
If grant funding isn't available in 2025, we will not run the program. Part of the hope with the Elevate grant that we received 5 years ago now was to really look at a redesign for the child support system. And so part of this would look to give that feedback to the state to share that this is something that could be included in the overall child support program, which costs are provided for by the state.
Okay. So there's reporting requirements for the grant to the state to give feedback on the success of the program in the future.
There's reporting requirements to the United Way
Or
of
to
how
the
we
United,
utilize
excuse
the
me.
funds, but not to the state specifically about this grant. But there is reporting requirements to the state overall about how Elevate is utilized, how Children's First is utilized, and how those can be encompassed in the child support programming overall, to take those out as specialized programs and really infuse them in as the child support program.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
If I can add, excuse me, just a comment relative to process. So as Krista alluded to, this has gone through the Social Services Committee, the Social Services Board, I should say, and they supported, as Krista said, the idea of this grant. In terms of process, I just conferred with Christy. Because it's not budgeted pursuant to state law, I believe we need to take this to the full board to amend the budget. It's not agendized for this committee, to forward it to the full board. I did have a brief conversation with Chair Van Cray from Health and Human Services. If there's a desire to have this go to Health and Human Services, again, I'm open to where the board leadership wants me to have to take this grant to get it approved, but just next step would at some point be to amend the budget to reflect essentially a revenue and an equal expense.
So do we typically involve standing committees in all budget amendments? Not necessarily.
Well, and that's, I think, again, it's been my experience, we can always benefit from clarity of process. And looking through your rules, specifically section 2.02 sub 6, it talks about the receipt of grants. That's the title of that section, and it reads, grant funds that are not provided for in the adopted county budget shall be approved by the Human Resource, Finance, and Property Committee. Receipt and approval of such grant funds shall begin with the completion of a budget transfer form and forwarded for review and approval. And that process we're doing, again, inclusion of the state law requirement that I just conferred with Christy about, I think might be instructive moving forward. But I don't know, Krista, if there's anything else you want to add, but I think the next step of having the full board approve a revenue, essentially an increased revenue and an increased expense within the social services budget would be appropriate.
Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion to accept the grant and move to the full board to forward the budget amendment to the appropriate funding categories and expense categories.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Limmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of acceptance as granted, recommending it to the county board will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, we are going to swap the order under B with the presentation of property owned by the county by Dave Mack first, so we have an understanding. You can come up here.
And as Dave readies himself, I'll just kick it off by saying, again, this is a follow-up to one of the items on your annual work plan about looking into really what bodies of property that the county holds and what opportunities exist for kind of either redevelopment, divestment, however you want to phrase that. So I asked Dave from Conservation Planning and Zoning to go through and kind of break those properties down into a couple of categories. And certainly This is our first attempt at it, and thank you, Dave and Stuart, for doing that. But if you do have any questions, that's kind of the impetus of this, and speaking with Chair Robinson to help move toward that idea of what opportunities exist, because you'll see there are a lot of parcels that the county owns. But really, my sense is the board identifying for staff, where do you want us to put our initial effort as it relates to redevelopment or divestment? Because certainly some categories may have a higher opportunity for kind of return on investment, and it's certainly the contemplation of the board that matters in that regard. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Administrator Leonard. Again, I'm Dave Mack. I was asked to speak for 5 minutes, and I think Lance just spoke on about 4 minutes worth of my time. So this will be short. So thanks, though. I just wanted to maybe let the committee know that a couple of years ago, we made some changes in our land information program. I'm the planning and land information manager for CPZ, and we decided the best way to create a team in our land information program was to move the real property listing work and the parcel mapping work down to CPZ, where we have a number of other staff that are there that work on similar types of issues and concerns. And so we now are all at CPZ, and we have a really good team. And one of those is Stu Carr, who's with us today. He's our parcel mapper, GIS technician for the county. He's been with us just under 2 years now, and was part of that move to bring some of the staff down to CPZ. With Mr. Leonard's introduction, we were tasked to kind of look at what county owns for parcels, property within the county. We put together a list here, and we've got a table that's in your packet that you can follow along with. Don't have a big full presentation, but I think everything that you need is right here. Interestingly, when we went through this whole program, this whole process, and what you might not be aware of is that on an annual basis, we get about 6,000 documents a year into the real property listing office, if you will, that we have to deal with. And part of that is then goes to Stu that does the mapping work to make sure that all those parcels fit with all the rest of the parcels within the county, and that we have to deal with. County itself has about 80,000 parcels between the cities, villages, and towns. And so we have a lot of work that's being done to make sure that those properties are being identified properly, so we can allow the assessors to do their work, so that we can get the tax money that we want from those parcels, so that we can do the work that we do at the county and all the other levels of taxable entities, I guess. So out of those parcels that Stu did most of the work on finding those parcels, we identified about just over 1,100 parcels of land that the county owns. And that might sound like a lot, but I'll cut off a lot of it right off the top by saying that between the parks, forest land, and the parks themselves, they encompass most of the property that we own. In the form of about 92% of the land that we own is in those two entities. Then you have this Central Wisconsin Airport and the landfill property. Those two properties then with the Parks Department, that equals about 98% of the parcels that we own. So a good share of what we own are parcels that we're using and that we really can't do a whole lot with. And so, and in the table that I have in front of you here, I've got 3 categories basically. Those that are currently being used, those that may have some limited redevelopment potential, and then some that may have some potential for redevelopment. Beyond those 4 categories that I just mentioned, we have county buildings, and we separated out the highway department properties that they have. We also own the UW SP campus properties, and then we also own a cell tower property within the county. I'll come back to talking a little bit about those some of those county buildings in a minute, but keep going down to those limited redevelopment potential properties. I'm sure a lot of people in the county don't know that about 375 acres of what we own is underwater. In the process of damming a few rivers in the county, Lake Wausau, Lake Dubay, and the Eau Plaine flowage. When those rivers were dammed and we created those lakes, some of that land then became ours through that process. We still own that land, and I really don't know how we might dispose of that land. It really doesn't have a whole lot of development potential. And
Sell a swampland?
what?
Sell a swampland?
It's not. Yeah, we could sell it as swampland if we drain, maybe. But that's one of those categories of land that we own that we really don't really have much we can do with. We do own a lot of property, and you can see here about 40 parcels right now that are related to right-of-way interests. When we're building roads, when we're doing some kind of right-of-way work on the county highway system, we've acquired properties. And some of those may be just slivers of land. Some of those really maybe needed to be looked at a little bit closer to see if there's any potential for disposing of those lands. But they do have some kind of a right-of-way impact or a reason for us to have them. So we would probably need to spend some time with the highway department in discussing those particular parcels. About 20 years ago, the Rib River flooded, and about 7 properties flooded down on the end of Sherman Street in Wausau by the Trails Inn Bar and Restaurant. Through a process that we went through with FEMA, we were able to acquire some funds from them, and we ended up purchasing those properties, and we actually tore the homes down. So we now own property in the floodplain along the Rib River in the city of Wausau that we probably aren't going to be able to do anything with, based on the fact that it's in the floodplain and it's FEMA dollars that paid for it. So I'm assuming they wouldn't want us to redevelop that property so that it could get flooded again. So we're probably going to have to hold on to that. And we also have a couple parcels we've identified that were old railroad right-of-way as part of an abandonment between Edgar and Fenwood. We found a couple pieces out there that are still little remnants, a couple acres worth, that we would have to really look at to see whether there was something we could do with those parcels as well. If you go down to the last category then, the redevelopment potential properties, we've got about 30 that we've acquired through tax deed. And that's when people have not paid their taxes, and we've acquired those properties through the deed process because of that. So those are probably the ones that have the most potential for us to look at to see what's on them. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at each individual parcel. We don't know if there's improvements on them at all right now or not. But we do have the ability to kind of look at those and see, can we get those back on the tax roll to redevelop those. Then we have another category at the end there that it's, we got about 10 pieces of land that through looking at the deeds, looking at the maps and things, we really don't know why we own it, which is an interesting concept. But I think in talking with Stu, we're in a position where we think some title search work needs to be done on those parcels to see if, what it is, why it is we may have acquired it, or who may have prior ownership to those properties, so that we could maybe dispose of those as well. It's not a lot. You can see there's only 3 acres for those 10 parcels. So it's not a lot of land, but it's still, if the intent is to try to divest ourselves of some of these properties that we own, that we could get back on the tax roll, those are some potentials. In the packet, I do have for you a map that shows where all these parcels are. And if you look at a Marathon County map, I'm looking at our screen here. You'd have to really zoom down on this, yeah. But in your packet, you can look at it. It's a PDF that you can zoom in and out with. When looking at a map of Marathon County, the one thing you'll notice when you do that is that you can never see anything in really great detail because of its size and the scale of the maps that we have to use. And so on that map, you'll see that there's really just the 4 top categories that we identified. The forest land, the parkland, the airport, and the landfill are the ones that really stand out. All the rest of them you would really have to zoom into to try to find that are scattered throughout the county. But it was just a visual representation. As long as we're the parcel mapping people, we wanted to make sure that there was one of those available for you if you're more visual in your approach to things. I just want to jump back up to the first category of the currently used parcels. We do have county buildings, and we've got 18 parcels that we've identified. Most of those you could probably identify yourselves. We've got the courthouse, we've got the River Drive complex, we've got the library in Wausau, we've got the old now social services building on Thomas Street. We've got the medical examiner's building. We have a sheriff's department building out on Stewart Avenue in the industrial park. The juvenile facility out on on the west side of Wausau. So we do have all those parcels identified, and those are what you would see in that category. Like I referenced, Thomas Street now with social services vacating that property, that has the potential for some redevelopment. Right now, CPZ and the Parks Department are being slated to be moving to North Central healthcare facilities or somewhere, I guess. I'm not sure about parks, but
Lakeview Drive complex, the campus.
Lakeview Drive.
The Lakeview campus, yes.
Okay, there you go. And we own that property too. That's part of our list of buildings that we own, or those properties that we own. But it just leaves the potential for some redevelopment to occur down on the river, on River Drive, as part of those holdings that we have. As well as just to the east of us here, there's a parcel that we own. It's a parking lot, just a few houses away from here that we own. We also own the land, like I said, with the UWSP campus. There's a parking lot north of the campus, north of Stewart Avenue, that is also a potential for us to redevelop, as well as the dorm property. The dorm is vacant, hasn't been used for a while, and so that property is also there as part of these lists that could be used for redevelopment potential. But that is 1,100 parcels of land that we own in a nutshell. Like I said, we do have the capacity to go in and start looking at some of these parcels individually and see what's happening on those properties so that we can make decisions. But that's, I think, the ball's now in your court to do that kind of work. So, any questions at all of us regarding these parcels or the work that we did?
Are there any questions for Dave? Kurt?
I guess just the only question I have, Dave, is, the 10 parcels that have been identified, and obviously they're not a large acreage, 3.13 acres, so I'm assuming some of those might be remnant parcels and that type of thing. Any idea how long it would take to do the research on those titled searches and to see if there is, potential for redevelopment on those or redeployment back onto the property tax rolls?
That's a good question, because we really do not have the staff that does title research work.
Right.
And so that might be something that we might have to hire out.
Okay.
And for those 10 parcels, it may not be a big project, but it might be something that we're going to have to look at from that regard. Yeah.
Could that be through cheats where we took it from an estate because nobody wanted it or claimed it?
And that's a good question. That's the whole point, is that we'd have to go back and research how we obtained those parcels, But they are parcels with PIN numbers and all of that, so they're actually identified parcels.
Any other questions? I think this sets the base for our understanding and how we move forward. So then jumping up to A, the process for disposing of excess county property. And obviously, we have a process for tax delinquent property. And just in talking to Kim, I think we'll schedule one of our next couple of meetings at an update on both the taking through tax foreclosure and NREM, where that process is, and where we are with the surplus property program, where we've agreed to put it out. I think that there might be some issues or questions that relative to establishment of value for the surplus property that we would want an update on. So we'll bring those in at an upcoming meeting. Then obviously those that are in use, we keep. We've got the remnant parcels. I think that could be a long-term goal of some of those remnant corners. I remember being on the highway committee in the 1970s and going out and grabbing corners and trying to straighten out or smooth out curves and going from a 3-rod to a 4-rod road or a 2 to a 3-rod road, and we're creating some excess. So I don't think that there may be some hidden gems in there, but not likely to have a lot. And the process that many other states, and I spent some time looking at what Department of Transportation's do. They, in many cases, look at offering it to the local unit of government. If they're not interested, looking at the neighbors, if there's a value to it, if they don't want to pay the appraised value, then putting it up for surplus property. But that's something that we could look at. I don't think that those are the priority parcels right now, but it's something that we could look at going forward. Then the question, and I think Supervisor Marshall raised the issue in the context of the budget, of what do we do with those valuable pieces of property? And we have obviously River Drive, which we'll be vacating. We have Thomas Street, which is surplus with a tenant. We have the parking lot on the other side of the R store. We have some decisions to make relative to the university campus, both in terms of the parking lot and the dorm. We have some other parcels that may or may not be available depending upon what happens with highway parks. We adopted a resolution not too long ago relative to housing. So I think the issue is how do we want to proceed with dealing with those parcels? Are there criteria that we would want to put in place relative to how we handle the sale? Is it an outright sale? Is it a request for proposals? I think all of those things are sort of on the table. Is there preferential treatment for certain items, housing, economic development, other things? And it's really where the committee will come in and into play in terms of shaping what that policy is. One of the questions when you look at other communities' processes of disposition, there's in some cases a dialogue with the local hosting community or the community in which it's located to see if there's an interest in selling it at the appraised value. All of those are factors that we could look at. So I would just throw it out I turn it over to Administrator Leonard and then for open discussion.
Sure. So I think, thanks, Dave, for the background. Again, the question as I see it from staff's perspective is really what direction as the county board want to provide for where we put our energy and effort and kind of give us some direction as to where to move forward. I think Chair Robinson's point about tax deed parcels, we have 30, that's a big number on that list, but once we understand how we're going to move forward with the surplus auction site and get a good guiding policy in place, my sense is it doesn't behoove the committee. It's not a good use of your time or the board's time to say, look at each one of those individually and say, how are we going to redevelop that? I mean, it's already housing and able to be, or a parcel to go through surplus auction. My sense is really on those properties that Chair Robinson just referenced and Dave made reference to about, perhaps where there's a higher potential redevelopment value for the parcel. So you're looking at the River Drive campus buildings, Thomas Street, the parking lot, to a lesser extent, the parking lot near this property, and of course the parking lot at the UW and the dorm. My sense, I reached out to some colleagues and I said, hey, how have you guys dealt with that in the past? The Village of Weston shared with me their RFP that they put out for one of their former government buildings to be redeveloped. I was able to find an RFP that La Crosse utilized for their former government building. It was interesting. I did a little bit of research. They went through a similar process not all that long ago as to what the Marathon County has with redeveloping or consolidating into new facilities a bunch of other government departments, and then, hey, this is our old building. Tell us what you want to do with it. I don't know actually where they shook out on what they did with it, but I did get the RFP from them as well. So my sense is staff really would benefit from that direction as to what are the things you would want to accomplish for those larger parcels, and doing a little bit of look into the RFP itself. My sense is the board may, making that decision of how to utilize those properties or how to divest or how to redevelop those, I mean, the board certainly cares about the transaction price, but also the nature of the use to which the parcel would be put, whether it would be a proper, the parcel would remain taxable, property taxable or not, so that the entity is a nonprofit. And then also, is it going to generate sales tax or jobs? Or, my sense is you'd want to know that, but that's just me trying to put myself in your shoes. Whatever you would like to know, I think that is probably a more parcel-specific discussion, but maybe I'm looking at that, of course, incorrectly. So anything you need, please let me know. Again, this is a lot of information. I will look into, just based on the conversation to this point, that title research idea that Dave brought up. We have used outside resources for title research through the tax delinquent process. I can work with Dave to have that move forward with those 10 pieces. I think the suggestion of having the highway, and speaking with Dave, having the highway department review the parcels that are related to roadway right-of-way makes sense. And to the extent that they are so closely related with existing right-of-way that we can map them within the right-of-way, that doesn't mean we're getting rid of the property, but if it still makes sense to hold on to it, we should classify it as right-of-way as opposed to a remnant parcel. So that might change your chart, but those are some notes that I've been taking. I don't know if there's anything else you're looking for from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the administrator hit on it right. I think we've got 3 different classes, and in my mind, the tax deed property probably is although right now relatively low at 30 parcels, I think that number is going to go up with the number of known parcels that are tax delinquent in the in-rem process. But we also have some specific requirements under state statute that is required, and we've got to understand that, however we dispose of those, if we use those through the excess surplus property, which is the direction that we originally went, I think on tax deeded properties, that the excess proceeds versus our costs have to go back to, or be offered back to, the original property owner. Oppose that, the parking lot, the dorm property, the River Drive property, the Thomas Street property, parking lot to the east of the courthouse here, I think those parcels are clearly distinct and different in that they're potentially redevelopable, and I think the process needs to be different. I think those are property specific, as the administrator mentioned, because I think we do want to control what happens on that property in the future. In other words, we don't want to, because the sale is not just the sale. In other words, we sell that property to the highest bidder. It may be the highest bidder at pick a number. It doesn't matter what that number is. But if they're going to pull it off of the property tax rolls, we no longer receive any revenue from it. Now, if that's going to in turn supplant tax revenue or supplant tax needed services, that's a different story. But in this case, I think we need to look at those specifically on each parcel and understand. So I would be in support of a RFP process where we can control the outcome, not just a for sale highest bidder, because then we don't have control over what the end result of that property is in the future.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo Chair Gibbs's comments too, because one of the things is I have residents that live right next to one of those properties, and I would like the impact on the community and specifically those residents taken into account when we offload that property. Well, the property on River Drive and also the property on Thomas Street as well, because I think that's an important factor that we need to consider when doing this one, those two particular properties that I mentioned, but I know that there are other properties too that we really need to, I've said this before, be good neighbors as the owners of that property and make sure that the residents are kept in mind when we sell that. And I think that would be through a RFP process as well, where we consider a number of factors, including that. I like the idea of sales tax generation, property tax generation. I think one of the real concerns is especially on River Drive, that's a high value property. And if it goes to a nonprofit entity or stays in the park system or however, it's not generating that sales tax or that property tax. And then what's the impact on our budget for that? So those are all things I'd like to be considered in all of that. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, on the comments on nonprofits, are you suggesting then that we say nonprofits are not eligible to put in for the RFP, as echoed by Chair Gibbs and Supervisor Hart? And secondly, we could go and try to do an RFP on what is already available and not currently occupied, which is the property north of UWSP, as kind of a trial run to see and learn from the process. And that property is available right now. Thank you.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to insinuate that nonprofits wouldn't be eligible, but I think it's imperative to understand what the nonprofit's role is and how does it fit the mission and purpose of the county government, and does it potentially have an impact on the need for services in the county. So if it reduces the county's need for county tax levy supported programs, I wouldn't be opposed. That's why I think it behooves us to look at an RFP for every proposed potential use of that property. So I'm not trying to eliminate any potential buyers, but I want to understand what their potential use is so that we understand what the long-term impact is for the county and the taxpayers.
A number of communities in the administrator referenced La Crosse, and La Crosse had a large development, and they put together a number of criteria for looking at, I think it was a 50-acre parcel that they were looking at. And, you know, the question is whether we want to have some overlying parameters in saying that our goal is to, you know, fulfill the county's strategic or comprehensive plan, but also part of that is economic prosperity, and then develop the RFP sort of on a site-specific basis and go from there. But I really like your idea of the trial and error. We've got two good trials. We could use both parking lots as guinea pigs if you wanted to just see how it would work. We're not ready to vacate River Drive, and we still have a tenant in Thomas Street, so we still have some continuing obligations or commitments in those buildings until those are addressed. It's going to be difficult for us to move those, but we could begin that process right away. And perhaps a way to do that would be to request administration prepare those two parcels for sale and proposals, and develop would you be comfortable with an RFP as a committee? And see how that works? Supervisor Marshall?
I guess we don't really have an economic development person on staff, and I know every municipality does. So my sense was that we would sell to a municipality and they would take that, but perhaps you could work with them or work with La Crosse County and how they evaluated properties.
Yeah, I can certainly follow up with them. I like the idea of, reaching out to the municipalities. I've certainly had conversations with the city of Wausau because a lot of these properties are in the city, and Liz Brodeck about the parking lot near the courthouse. But from a staff perspective, I like the opportunity to learn in a perhaps less challenging environment than trying to figure out what to do with River Drive. If we start with a parking lot and get some direction from this committee on, we can bring back a draft for an RFP to release and try to put together those criteria for what you want to see. Certainly, I think the parking lots they lend themselves better to, the parking lot near the courthouse is immediately adjacent to housing and immediately adjacent to a convenience store. So it'll be interesting what uses come back. That might be a pretty simple RFP. Similarly, the parking lot across from the UW properties is right in a neighborhood. So we may get more housing related responses. But I certainly like that idea as well from the staff perspective. So it's a less pressure filled situation to talk about and kind of get the kinks out of, okay, how does this going to work? We can bring you back a draft RFP with some criteria and make sure. I think the consensus I've heard is, again, we want to know as much as we can about the responses. We want to attract a wide array of responses, but no price, use, for-profit, nonprofit status. If there are other things, please let me know, but we can try to include those. But I certainly like that idea. Oh yeah, we can include the zoning in the description of the property as well.
Supervisor Lemery.
Do you happen to know if the properties that we're talking about on Stewart Avenue and then the one on Forest are in a TIF district?
I don't believe the parking lot here that's not in a TIF, but it might, the one,
Stewart
it's either
Avenue
very
might be.
close, it might be within the extension boundaries. I know there's a TIF very close.
Within the half-mile boundary, but the parking lot by the UW may not be in the TIF because I think Stewart Avenue is a boundary, but it may be within the half-mile outlying area. We can take a look for the city and see if it's in there.
So what, I'm sensing a consensus around a pilot RFP process for those two properties. And we can, we can adopt a motion, or we can do it through consensus and request that they refine the process and bring a proposal back at a subsequent meeting. Would you prefer a motion, a directive?
I'm just thinking out loud here. The other thing I heard is that resonated me with Supervisor Marshall's comments about, reaching out to the municipality because they have the economic development professionals. I can very bluntly ask the city, hey, are you interested in the UW parking lot? And I can bring that back as well. Or partnering in the development of the RFP. But if the desire, the general consensus, hey, come back with a draft RFP, I'm fine with that, whether you do a formal motion or not.
Supervisor Hart and then Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think I'd be fine with having the administrator come up with a draft RFP for us to consider. I was just jotting down some factors that I would like considered when deciding this, but also people should know about this if they're sending a request in. And this is my personal ranked order, would be like impact on residents, property tax impact, highest bidder, sales tax, and then municipality consultation. So I think if we have something in place with those in mind, I would be very much in support of that. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support the RFP because I do think that will lend us more options to evaluate, and I think more options is better. While I can appreciate that we are looking at being good neighbors, we also need to realize that a county-owned property is, property supported by every taxpayer in the county. So that should be not number one, but included in the list. Thank you.
So do we need a motion, or do you have sufficient direction?
I feel like I have pretty good direction. Thank you. This was very helpful.
Anything from Yi or from Allison?
Yes, I was just going to say that I concur with Supervisor Marshall. I'm supportive of RFP. I also want to add a little bit to Supervisor Hart's list about job creations as well too. So,
All right. We have consensus, and when you're ready, we will place it on the agenda.
Yeah, I guess that's the one follow-up. Is there a timeline? I know we spoke earlier about kind of the next things you want to accomplish in the next several months. Is this something you are looking for a response, some draft to get something in front of you in February or March? Or like, if you say your next meeting, I'm going to have heart palpitations. But I will work diligently to have it to you. If you're meeting in February, your February 22nd meeting, if that's appropriate, I can do my best to deliver on that. All right.
Is that acceptable? I think realizing that Mike's gone, and although we're ably represented today.
I'm not doing anything so far.
So you can have the RFP done by the end of the meeting? Is that what you're saying?
All right. I think there's consensus. And Dave, thank you and Stu, thank you for your work on this. It is valuable. I think there's some work for us to do to follow up on it. And we have consensus moving forward. So anything else on this issue? Chair Gibbs.
I guess I was just going to, if there is additional resources needed to do the research on those parcels that we don't have any, identity or how we acquired those parcels. Again, they're small acreage, 3-point-some acres, but if we need those additional resources, I think currently you could bring a request back for the funding from the county HR Finance Committee.
Yeah, my sense I'll look in our professional services budget and confer with Dave. And like I said, we do have that work being done through the treasurer's office for the tax delinquent parcels. We can see maybe some are self-explanatory to figure out why we own them, but yeah. Between CPZ and administration, we'll come back with a proposal. And if we need additional funds, we'll let you know. But I certainly have heard the direction, figuring out kind of why do we own those and what limitations exist is also on the list.
All right. And we'll move on to the committee work plan. And I put in the agenda the work plan that we brought to you at the beginning of this session. And I sat down with the chair and the administrator just to talk about some sequencing, because we basically are done in March for all practical purposes with this session. So we tried to identify what might need to go to the board, what might need to, what we can do within the committee. And I think you saw, one of those items was the surplus property. But if we look at the ARPA At the next meeting will be on a regular basis throughout the year, given the fact that this is the last year that we can encumber those funds. We will be reviewing the status of the ARPA expenditures on at least a quarterly basis. This to make sure if we have lapses or projects that aren't going to get done or that are under or over budget, that we can react to them. And that update will be at the next meeting. We then have the issue of the sale and disposition of property, which we talked about. The tax delinquent property process. I think I'd like to have an update just based on the discussion that I had with Kim briefly, and how do we value for surplus property? But where are we? Where are we in the NREM process, both in the acquiring of those parcels? We haven't taken any parcels in quite some time. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we're in that. And Dan, if you want to maybe give us an update.
So I have a mini update for you. Prior to his departure, I did speak to Attorney Purner, so some initial steps have been taken to initiate that court process. I believe that he is awaiting from the Treasurer's Office certain information, which he should be receiving on January 15th, and then the first batch of those foreclosures will be started. As far as the surplus is concerned, that's all been affected by the Hennepin County case, which ruled that the county cannot take property other than whatever taxes are owed to it, interest, fees, and any costs that are incurred in recouping those outstanding taxes. In light of that case, I believe that we have amended our ordinance to state that the county may not retain funds acquired from the sale of tax delinquent property in excess of the amount of past due taxes owed, interest penalties, and the amount of property taxes that would have occurred in the year in which the sale occurs.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we able to bill for staff time to acquire those properties and dispose of them in that allocation? In other words, hourly rates, including overhead?
So that would be so we would have to somehow quantify that. That's kind of one of those that the case is relatively new, so I'm not really sure, what has been tested yet, but I would assume that yes, if we can reasonably quantify what those costs are, whatever time allocated, we may be able to then count that as fees, like towards that. For example, even attorney's fees that we would have to pay. I'm not sure. If we had to hire private counsel, it would obviously cost us money. If Attorney Purner does it, it's still value that is reallocated from a different.
Just doing some research on this, some counties in other states, and we're all subject to the same Supreme Court decision, but they were, in one county had, for instance, a $250 fee for the clerk and a $500 fee for the county's attorney in that case. So we may want to look at what our fee structure is and if there's a basis for those going forward. But I think we need to do it in light of what that Supreme Court ruling might impose on us. But there are other approaches.
And if I could add, I know the treasurer's not here, but I believe, and maybe Kim knows off the top of her head, sorry for the test question, but I think we're including our title research, which we did outsource, into those miscellaneous fees that we're adding on each parcel so that we can recoup that. I will pose a question to my colleagues to see if anyone else has clear policies, but Chris and I are having a side conversation based on what this question, and I think our off-the-cuff responses. I like the fee for a department's work per parcel. It's cleaner as long as we tie it to a reasonable contemplation of the time and energy. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to, kind of as Dan alluded to, the difficulty with billing time to specific parcels for work. But I will reach out to my colleagues and see if they have any better insights on that, but that's our off-the-cuff response.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we don't know what we don't know because hasn't gone. I think a lot of this is going to get tested in court at some point. Now, WCA has been working diligently to try to get some clarity around some of the challenges that existed with the way that legislation was drafted, but at this point, we're still stuck with the way the rules have been written, and some people are interpreting them one way, and some people are interpreting them another way. And so I think at some point, we either get clarification through legislation or litigation, one of the two.
Great. The long-term facility plan, we had a discussion, and as part of that, Supervisor Marshall, we wanted to include the 5-year KIP, both in terms of, where are we with our buildings and what are our needs. And so we're looking at a presentation potentially on February 7th on how do we deal with it? What are our expected operating maintenance expenses forecast for potential large facility projects? We'll include in that the discussion of the highway shop, the ice. We've got different plans that we put out there. Where is the ice arena? Where are we with this building? Where are we with the forensic science center? Trying to build all of those in so we have a better understanding of what the potential needs might be. So we will be looking at that at our February 7th meeting. And Deputy Administrator Holman will be tasked with a lot of work.
We just met earlier today.
And
we're sharing that one.
in the context of that February 7th meeting, we would also get into the fund balance reserve education, following up on that. So Chrissy's a little preoccupied right now because of the year end and prepping for the audit. So we would, again, going at what is the purpose of each of the funds, current balances, sources of funding, et cetera. We'll have those presentations on February 7th. The TIF Supervisor Marshall is a member of that task force. They've been meeting often and long. But that report, there will be a report coming out of the task force to the county board this session. It will not, it's the resolution authorizing the creation of the TIF task force did not call for it to come back here, but to go rather to the full county board. So that work is in progress. Cultural competence we had on there. We've had discussions with Molly in the past, relative to some of our HR policies and how it affects our recruitment, retention, and our ability to attract others. So we're looking at the March meetings, having a human resource policy review, intro and introduction, sort of a follow-up on some of the discussions we had last year, the benefit packages, et cetera, and then looking to potentially modify that at the second meeting in March. Also in February at our educational meeting, we will have to deal with the issue of salaries for our elected officials. They are on the ballot, and nomination papers are out in March and April.
April 15th.
April 15th through June 1st. So we will deal with those at that time, but we will also be carrying over items like the RFP for the surplus property. We'll be carrying over discussions on the fund balance and others. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of build on a little explanation on the HR policy review piece. Molly and I have talked a number of times on this, and our existing policies really blend two things together. I think there's very clearly, as Chair Robinson referenced, there are HR policies that this committee should approve and provide direction to administration to implement procedural, kind of administrative processes that flow from that. We've integrated those two things together, and our plan is to try to take our existing amalgam of policies and operational items that are intermixed and really separate those so that the county board and this committee particularly can give us direction. Here are our existing policies. You can approve those. One thing, for example, within our existing document, it talks about how salaries for elected officials, for example. Our policy document references that being done in a way that is different than the way that you directed salary increases for the sheriff and clerk of courts 2 years ago. So my sense is we'll probably have a consistent process with the kind of batches of elected officials because, as you know, they come every 2 years because the elections are staggered. So we want to clean those things up and make sure that the things that are county board driven policies versus administration, how people request time off and those sort of things, that doesn't need to come to this body. But that'll be the kind of the guiding principle. And our hope is to be able to bring you that introduction and education at your first meeting, answer questions, and make any modifications you direct for some updates of that policy in March at your second meeting.
And I know Supervisor Marshall's had an ongoing interest in health insurance, and maybe if we could, in the context of that discussion, just get an update on where we are and directionally where we're going as well. So that really fills out our agendas for the short term. The issue of cultural competence and the whole issue of strategic plan, and that we'll see if we can fit that in there. I think a discussion beyond just our employment policies, but where are we with some of our other policies on an ongoing basis? We need to look at that. We'll see where that fits in, if we can slide it in there into the discussion. And we've checked some things off. We've made some progress, and without the work plan, I don't think we would have. Are there, as we look at that, so again, looking at, we have an HR, potential human resources issue that may be coming to us in January 23rd. That may lead to a closed session. We will have the ARPA update. In the February meeting would be fund balance and the long-term facilities plan and the KIP, how we're dealing with that. The February 22nd, again, would be the elected officials, and obviously some follow-up. We just kicked the surplus property RFP to that meeting, and then the policy review and others. So we'll be filling those agendas pretty full. Chair Gibbs.
So the one thing, I think we need to think about what information we want to have when we're setting the salaries for those elected officials in the future. So maybe this committee needs to give thought to what information they want to be able to do that in the appropriate way as far as setting salaries for those elected officials.
So it's not an actionable item for today, so I would maybe ask that we put it on either the next meeting or the February 7th meeting for just request of what factors would go into that. Or maybe we could ask administration for recommendations, and then, so it's not, if we have a strong objection or concern over the direction that you're going, you'd want to know that in advance.
Right.
Any other questions relative to the work plan? All right. That then takes us to the ideas for future consideration. I think we've just talked about a lot of those. Are there other issues that you would like to see us consider in the next 3 months? We still have, I will say, one of the issues that we have is the conduit borrowing policy. It wasn't specifically listed on this agenda because it's going to executive committee tomorrow for a discussion of what issues are there. I know that that has been a concern to Supervisor Lemmer, and how do we advance that so that somehow, if we continue to advance with the funding for the digester projects and longer term, how we might deal with other projects will be sometime in the future when it's ready. Not sure what the timeframes. Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I pull up our committee and it says all upcoming meetings, there's none listed for March. Is that, there's 2 in February and 2 in April, but nothing for March.
Well, earlier in the week, there were none listed beyond this,
I'll check into it.
So I just assume generally the second Wednesday and the fourth Tuesday, but we will make sure that it gets on there. So if you look at, so we're looking right now at obviously the 23rd. In February, it would be the 7th and the 22nd. And in March, it would be the 13th and the 28th. All right, our next meeting is on the 23rd. Anything else come before us? We'll have to invite Dave Mack more often. We get done earlier.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you. Kurt, can I brief you on our call?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.